Well, hello, GodotCon. It's so great to be here. Thank you for having us. My name's Andre Stackhouse, and along with my co-founder, Anand Malik, we'll be talking about our first game studio, New Noiseworks. It's brand new, and it's a little different, so we think the Godot community is going to be really interested. And let's just go ahead and start by asking everyone, how you doing? How the last couple of years been? Oh, right. So, I think like a lot of you, Anand and I have had a lot of time at home, just thinking about stuff, maybe working on some stuff, and that got us wondering, what if we made something nice? It's a pretty cool idea, but in order to make something nice, the first thing you have to figure out is what's nice. And this audience might be a little bit biased, but I think these folks know that open source software is nice. And if you look at this set of tech, there's so much to like, Linux, Itch, Mozilla, Heroic Labs, and of course Godot. And the reason this particular set of technologies was chosen for this slide is because it sort of implies a burgeoning open source stack with which games can be both made and played. And so you're seeing how, you can develop a game on a Linux system and use an open source game engine like Godot, make an open source backend with the products at Heroic Labs, and distribute on open source platforms like Itch, or even a completely open platform like the web. And so we're seeing the dawning of a more free and open and lower barrier to entry world of game development. And I think that there's a lot of promise for both players and developers down that road, and that's what we want to explore. So can we take all of these, technologies and pipelines and processes and base a game studio around that? Can we make an open source game studio? And the thing about game studios is it actually turns out, I've done a little research, and they're not actually made out of source code. And so the more appropriate way to think about this question is, can we make a game studio that's based on the concepts and values of free and open source software? And there's a lot of questions that come to mind when you think about this, especially in the context of games. Can open source games be both free and make money? Can open source products compete with commercial alternatives? Can a game development community make better games than traditional studios? And can a game be both open source and a creative work of art? And, again, this is me and Anand's first game studio. We don't necessarily have answers to all these questions. These are things that we're figuring out and are subject to change. But if you just take a moment to brainstorm some big ideas with us, I think you'll start to get a little bit of an idea of how we see some of this stuff working. And so let's just start with, actually maybe not so big of an idea, but how do we make a game free and also economically viable to support a game studio? And the fact is, free to play is a tried and true business model in the game industry, and a lot of the most lucrative games are free to play and monetized through the purchase of in-game cosmetics. So in this sense, we can see that it's totally possible to make a game that doesn't price people out, is accessible to everyone, and yet still can be incredibly lucrative. Open source games. So open source games have actually been with us from the beginning. You'll see in the lower right corner of this slide we have NetHack. And I think the open sourceness of NetHack contributed to its popularity, but and that it's still a very relevant game because of the influence that it had on the roguelike genre. And so the ability to have its code maintained and be spread and shared, I think, has contributed to its ability to be relevant so many years later. And you see similar things with games like 2048. You know, it was a game that a lot of people played. It kind of went viral, but part of what made it go viral was that the open source community had a lot of fun with it, and they built a lot of bots and AIs, and so part of what is exciting about this slide is just interesting things happen to your game when you open them up to an entire open source community, and people will do things with these games that the original developers could never necessarily even think about. And yet, to the player, they're not even necessarily aware that these games are open source. Um, and so, we want to take things just a little bit farther than any of these by saying, what if we made an open source game, but also in an open source engine? And we believe that that will really allow us to focus mostly on the game design and making our games fun, while also, using popular open source technology that makes it easier for the open source community to get involved with our project and contribute. And um, you know, that brings us to our third idea, which is the idea of worker ownership. And this is like, if anything, even less trodden territory. And I've only got two examples to share with you right now. But one of them is a big one. So Motion Twin made the super hit Dead Cells, and a lot of people don't know that that is a worker-owned game studio. Down below, we have the Pixel Pushers Union and their game Tonight We Riot. It's also a great game. These are studios that eschew. They don't have the same traditional structure as a lot of other studios. And to hear it in the words of Motion Twin, if you go to their website, uh, right on their splash screen, they say "No boss." And so that's one of the things we're thinking about in terms of what kind of game studio do we want to have is can we make a game studio that's better to work at than the AAA game industry, with all of its crunch, um, and and so we're trying to think, how do we make games like how do we make a game studio that's the best place for creative and talented game developers to work? And we think, how about if they own it and they make the decisions about it? They know how they want to work, they know how to make good games. And so we think that we don't need a boss to tell us how to do it. That's the idea of worker ownership. And so all of these are fairly, these are trodden ideas. They've been done before. But I think the really big idea is, can we combine all of these ideas into a single product? And so that's why today I'm so excited to pass this off to Anand, who's going to show you the latest footage of our upcoming 2D multiplayer farming sim, The Promised Land.
All right, good morning and welcome to the Promised Land. It's about noon here in this little game demo. You start off with the farm. You have to tend to it and clear it with some expected functionality. You can axe down these trees over here. Expected functionality, excuse me, sith away some weeds, etc. You'll have some crops to manage. You can plant them in tilled soil, water, yada yada. You know the drill. There's a fishing game, etc. You can go to town. There'll be some characters to talk to. You can talk to them. They'll have clothes eventually. And if you talk to some of them, you might complete missions. There'll be a whole mission structure, experience, yada yada. Speaking of clothes, you'll be able to change your outfits. We'll have customizable outfits. Right now, there's only 3 different looks. But hopefully we'll be able to make a business model around selling these outfits in different kinds, rerouting 60% to causes that need it. And I think that's pretty cool. You can also have the outfits represent those causes as speak. But this isn't just a single player game, right? It's a multiplayer game. So, hey, look at that. We have 4 other clients. You can see my first player is represented on the screen. Hey, everyone. I'm going to send a chat message to everybody. Yo, yo. This person. Hey, let's go to Wow 2's farm. And we could all head over to this person's farm over here. Wow, two. Sometimes you have to walk over twice. Let's get everybody over. And this is all being managed by Godot and the game client, obviously. The server technology is Heroic Labs Nakama, as discussed earlier, and a tool called OMGD. So finally, you can see that we can all go on each other's farm and share the experience of farming, whatever that may be, et cetera, and tell a different story. We hope to kind of go in the future and show what a more of a utopian society could look like, or just one that's got more things figured out than ours, right? Anyway, so all this multiplayer stuff is being developed in Godot and Nakama, and we made a tool called OMGD to kind of to help develop this. Let's talk about that a little bit. Center view. All right. So if Godot makes game development easy, what makes multiplayer game development hard? It's the internet, right? Godot is a computer program that helps you make other computer programs other games. But once you want to make a multiplayer game, that game has to connect to a server, and then you have to scale that server. And then if you want to, what if you want to make changes? What if you just want to demo something on a small team or to a QA team or to your manager or whatever? How do you do that? Obviously there are ways. I'm a web developer. I've been that way for I've been doing that for about the past decade or so. And one of the biggest things is automation has helped answer those questions as they would pertain to web development. How do you make changes and demo them before pushing them live, as it were? So what OMGD, or Open Multiplayer Game Development, hopes to do is leverage existing open source technology, much of which comes from the web world, to automate the development and testing of multiplayer games. So we're using a whole bunch of open source technology on top of open source technology in our stack. As aforementioned, of course, Godot, Heroic Labs Nakama, which is a distributed server for social and real-time games and apps. Docker, a very important tool for virtualizing and containerizing an operating system and various things that could mean. Docker's amazing. Look it up. Itch.io is a Butler tool to help us push stuff up to itch. HashiCorp's Terraform, a very interesting tool which helps us automate the deployment or the creation and destroying of servers on places like Google Cloud or Amazon Web Services, essentially so we can help you create test servers without really you having to know very much, which is neat. And finally, of course, Exhibit. You can't stack too many things on top of each other without that. How do you use OMGD? It's a command line driven tool for now. It bootstraps the project using Godot and Nakama, and it generates code to help enable multiplayer communication, specifically commands like OMGD new your game, whatever you want to call your game, then OMGD code gen. There'll be different code generators, but for now, there's one called channel, which will create a multiplayer channel for you. It uses Docker to run servers locally for testing and development, and it uses Docker and Terraform to build and deploy your game to the cloud. We'll talk about that in a little bit. This means setting up and tearing down servers at will, as aforementioned, such that you can basically test individual changes to dialogue levels, gameplay, whatever, independently and in isolation. So no need for a batch deploy or to coordinate deployments across the whole team or limit on test servers. You can have as many things, servers as you have things to test. That's up to you as an option. Obviously, there's some pricing limits there. But basically, the big point is that you focus on your game code. OMGD handles the internet stuff. That's the goal. So how all that stuff works. For your local development environment, these are some commands that you'll use, most notably OMGD server start tail, just to tail the server, and you'll be using a combination of Heroic Labs, Godot, and Docker to tie this all together. The client build, you'll need to basically build things. You can do this in Godot, but we use Docker to help build for other environments like staging and production. And we use Godot and Docker for that. And using those commands, you'll get the outputs of the Windows, Mac, and Linux builds, as well as the web build. Server deploy is going to be wrapped up in one deploy command linked to a profile that you'll create. Profile-name is the linkage. It'll use Terraform to deploy to Google Cloud Platform for now, and to be written in is support for Amazon Web Services, Azure, DO, hopefully your own on-prem setup as well. All of that can be supported by Terraform, so it should not be too difficult. to also support on-prem. And then we want to deploy clients wherever, which is what we're going to now. We want to get to Steam, GOG, and other providers as well to figure out where things go and what your account information is on things like itch and Google Cloud. We use a YAML configuration. It's a very simple file. You're looking at it. You can use the game block for your own custom variables if you wish to have different profiles of different variables. For instance, with the Promised Land, locally we run the timescale at one shortened time, sometimes just to test things. But on the servers, we'll run it at a different scale. And this is how we use that, how we control that. For data that's consistent across profiles but used in your game and server, things like prices, things you'd want synced for a matter of hacking authority, etc. You can use the resources folder and a template system to build templates such that data can be shared by both your server and client builds. All right. Gross. All right, so let's go over some limitations, which will recast the strengths of the tool and where it's currently at right now. So one big limitation is that real-time is written in a separate programming and language, Lua or Golang, as opposed to GDScript. This basically means no headless Godot server is actually running on the servers, and it makes authoritative collision detection hard, which makes shooters hard, and that's a little bit tough, but we might be able to support that in OMGD v2, so it's a limitation currently. Another limitation is that this does require a good amount of comfort with the command line and Git, which not all game developers are great with. Managing a Google Cloud or an Amazon Web Services, Azure, etc. account, still a technical challenge, more or less. Like it's a light one, even with OMGD, and that's a bit tough. And OMGD itself isn't necessarily ready for production use cases. So let's see if we can flip these as strengths, which is true. So with regards to real time, this is still great for turn-based games, card games, single-player games with limited online features, like high scores or just checking the back end to see what other players did at that point in the game, etc. That's very achievable right now with Godot and Nakama. Collision detection is late. Who cares? Also, we'll probably have to wait for Godot 4 to support everything, and that's good. It's a motif. The command line's a wild animal. If you're uncomfortable with it, you should just try to treat it like something that you're understanding. In all seriousness, though, if we can keep this project up, we'll make GUI tools. We won't make people learn command lines, fine, and installers, etc. In regards to having difficulty setting up cloud-based accounts with billing, etc., we could potentially make a cloud-based build tool to aid development and act as a middleman for you and manage those things, and figure out what that means as an open source company, especially. And as far as production use case of OMGD, Godot and Nakama are production ready. Something that's important to note. All right, so let's look at a potential roadmap for OMGD. Right now, we're on version 0. That's our release currently. For version 1, we'd like to have a well-defined release strategy, Windows support, an idea of how to expand the code both internally and externally, and a really solid versioning strategy, not just for the CLI and release tool, but also for the sub-packages and code generators we'll be making. So just figure out how to define this as a code package such that it can be expandable without having to make a major rewrite to support those things down the road. And let's see if we can do a limited set of features. Version 2, and this could happen earlier, someone really wants to support it, I think would be great. It would be to support something called Agones, which is going to allow scalable headless Godot builds as servers via Kubernetes. Which we'd still obviously keep Nakama for all the other services it supports, authentication, storage, etc. But this would unlock collision detection for us in an authoritative way. Ideally, this would release around the same time or after Godot 4.0 stabilizes. It would probably take a bit to figure out. It could work with 3 though. Anyway, eventually what we'd like to do is support all actors in a typical game studio: artists, writers, PMs, QAs, investors and stakeholders, etc. Everybody should be able to make little changes and show them to each other, regardless of location, especially since so many of us are working remotely. All right, that's it. We're really excited to take a step forward. Obviously, doing anything open source is a little bit new, especially on the company level, but I think it does start with tools, and that starts with getting contributors if we can. Please head over to github.com new noiseworks. You can check out this project. We'll have the promised land open source as well. And check out the game at the website here if you want a little more information, or as well as our Twitter account. All right, take care.